At the beginning of the Renaissance, the throne of France was once again under threat. The ambitious emperor wanted to dominate Europe. The King of France was prepared to do anything to save his realm. The rivalry would lead to 27 years of war. But another sovereign would play the peacemaker. After the 100 Years' War, France still had to fight for peace. On January 23, 1516, the King of Spain, Ferdinand of Aragon, died. He was 64 years old. He bequeathed to his grandson, Charles of Habsburg, an unparalleled inheritance. The kingdoms of Spain, Naples, Sicily, and Sardinia, as well as colonies in the New World, discovered by Christopher Columbus 24 years earlier. These lands were in addition to an earlier legacy, that of his great-grandfather Charles the Bold, who left him the Netherlands and what is now Belgium. At just 17 years old, Charles of Habsburg's empire extended from the Netherlands to Spain, and from the Mediterranean all the way to the Americas. It was vast, but it wasn't enough for Charles. A devout Catholic, his ambition was to build a vast Christian empire to rule the whole of Europe. He was intelligent and ruthless. Corruption, blackmail, and war. Charles would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. This made the other European leaders very nervous. None more so than the King of France, Francis I. Francis was born September 12, 1494. He had never been destined to rule. Born into a distant branch of the Valois dynasty, Charles was no more than a distant cousin of King Louis XII. Louis had failed to father a son, so he passed his crown to Francis. When he was 14, Francis joined the royal family at Blois Castle, where he was received as the crown prince. At the age of 19, he married Louis XII's only daughter, Claude of France. When Louis XII died on New Year's Day, 1515, his now son-in-law, Francis of Angoulême, became king. He was 20 years old. After his coronation in Reims, his entry into Paris on February 25, 1515, set the tone for his entire reign. Francis would be a flamboyant monarch.
The King!
The new King of France was warmly welcomed by the aristocracy. And his victory at Mérignon, where he recaptured Milan from the Duke of Sforza, made him the new Caesar.
You look magnificent, Mother.
You too, my son.
This auspicious reign
My dear Margaret.
was supported by his mother and his sister Margaret.
You are truly beautiful.
I thank you.
In 1519, an opportunity arose which would reinforce his power. The death of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. With Maximilian dead, the position of Holy Roman Emperor became vacant. The imperial crown wasn't hereditary. The emperor had to be elected. Francis was the first candidate to put himself forward for the job. But he didn't have a single drop of German blood. Charles of Habsburg, the new King of Spain, on the other hand, was also Maximilian's grandson. He had no intention of letting his family lose the crown. He decided that he too would stand for election. On March 1st, 1519, in Frankfurt, the empire's arch-chancellor gathered together the electoral council of the Golden Bull. This council of 3 archbishops and 4 princes were the only ones allowed to elect the new emperor. To win the title, the candidates needed to score the most votes, but to do that would cost serious cash. Charles and Francis were both rich, but neither was rich enough to pay the bribes needed to win. They would need to borrow the money. That is where Jakob Fugger came in.
Have you checked? This one?
Fugger was the greatest banker and financier of his time, the richest man in Europe.
Who receives this? The same ones?
He was the man who first came up with the idea of adding interest to loans. Fugger was also Maximilian's chief financial backer, and therefore he wanted to help the late emperor's grandson claim the crown.
Sire, I believe we can do great things together in Europe.
In order to help Charles win, Fugger proposed a deal, a loan in return for a sizable share of the Habsburg silver mines.
This is outrageous.
Charles didn't want to give away his family's profits. He decided he would fight the election without Fugger's financial support.
Offer you my help.
Fugger was annoyed by Charles' arrogance, so he offered his financial services to his rival.
Your Majesty,
Ah, my friend. I hope you bring me good news.
that is why I'm here.
Soon the crown of the empire will be mine.
Fugger offered the French king 369,000 florins, about 47 million euros today, at 10% commission. With such a huge sum behind him, Francis was sure to win the election.
So, Fugger, my friend, where did you disappear to?
Sire,
When Charles found out, he summoned Fugger to court. Desperately, he agreed to hand over the profits of his silver mines in return for 543,000 florins, almost 71 million euros.
say, sire.
Here it is.
In total, Fugger handed over 846,000 gold florins in bribes to the Electoral Council. Unsurprisingly, Charles of Habsburg was unanimously elected Holy Roman Emperor. The coronation of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, was scheduled to take place a year later. Francis would use this year to do whatever he could to stop his rival's coronation.
I will break the emperor.
he wasn't the only one intent on stopping Charles. King Henry VIII of England usually went to war to defeat his enemies, but his foreign minister Cardinal Wolsey advised him that on this occasion, an alliance would be more beneficial.
The devil would take such an alliance. War must be declared on this emperor. Only this will stop his hunger for power. Believe me, Wolsey.
But Wolsey wanted peace and refused to give up. He eventually persuaded Henry to sign a treaty with France against Charles. 2 years previously, Wolsey had brokered an agreement between the two countries which promised the marriage of the 8-month-old Dauphin of France and the King of England's 2-year-old daughter, Mary.
Oh, my angel. See here, Wolsey. My most beautiful declaration of peace with France. Yes, my baby. That's right. You're not afraid. You're not afraid.
On May 31st, 1520, south of Calais, a diplomatic summit between England and France was held. It would become known as the Field of the Cloth of Gold. The King of France got ready. Like Henry VIII, he had sworn not to shave his beard until the accord was signed. On June 7th, 1520, the two kings finally met.
My friend.
My dear Francis.
At last we meet.
Yes.
For 3 weeks, Henry and Francis were inseparable, except at mealtimes. So great was the fear of being poisoned. 3 centuries of war were not easily forgotten. Behind the scenes, their counselors were busy negotiating a treaty of alliance. 500 years later, a plaque commemorates the location of this summit. The Field of the Cloth of Gold remains one of the most significant meetings of the Renaissance. The remarkable event was painted by the artist Frederick Boutewerk. For the occasion, Henry had built a vast temporary castle in the village of Guinness. It had brick foundations, wooden walls, a painted canvas roof, and huge glass windows. The whole thing was decorated with great artworks. The English king is even said to have demanded 2 fountains, in keeping with Franco-English tradition, one for wine and one for beer. The French encampment on the other side of the hill at Ardres was every bit as opulent. Francis had erected huge tents, covered with sheets woven with gold thread, as big as the halls of Blois Castle. It was an auspicious setting for the signing of a new treaty, which would stop Charles V being crowned. Legend has it that Francis and Henry even had a wrestling match. After a long, fierce battle, Francis is believed to have lifted Henry before pinning him to the ground. This was utterly humiliating for the English monarch.
The winner is Francis! Hooray!
Flushed with victory, Francis had no idea how this humiliation would affect the alliance. Whether the wrestling bout ever took place or not, the Cloth of Gold summit was a waste of time. Francis had not sooner returned to Blois than he heard that Charles V had been crowned emperor. Worst still, Henry VIII and the emperor had formed an alliance with Pope Clement VII against him. In 1521, Charles attacked French-held Milan and won. Francis was furious. 1 year later, Francis sent his troops to reconquer the town. But it was a disaster. Francis refused to accept defeat. He decided to join his men in battle. On July 23rd, the king went to the Abbey of Saint-Denis to perform the ritual which preceded all military campaigns. He placed the relics of Saint-Denis on the altar and prayed for victory. Less than a month later, on August 17th, having named his mother Louise of Savoy as regent, he set off to fight. In late 1523, heading for Milan, he crossed the Alps and annihilated a weakened imperial army. But in the fight, he lost his most trusted captain, Pierre Terrail, who was the hero of the Battle of Mérignon and said to be fearless and beyond reproach.
Soldiers, forward!
Even without Bayard, in late October 1524, the French king and his army managed to retake Milan. Emboldened by his victory, Francis turned his attention to the occupied town of Pavia. On the night of February 23, 1525, 23,000 imperial soldiers pulled white tunics over their armor as a rallying sign. In just a few hours, over 30,000 French soldiers overwhelmed Charles V's army. By 8 o'clock in the morning, Francis was convinced that the battle was won. But he had not noticed that a Spanish rear guard was firing on his troops. In less than 4 hours, the French army was all but annihilated. Pavia was a catastrophic massacre. 9,000 lives were lost. But Francis refused to surrender. He fought on valiantly.
It's the king!
Despite his bravery, Francis fell, defeated. He had sustained injuries to his face and hand. For the third time in France's history, after Saint Louis and John the Good, the king was taken prisoner. Charles V learned of his victory while he was in Toledo. He allowed his prisoner to write to his mother.
All that has been left to me is my honor and my life.
Francis prayed that someone would pay a ransom to secure his freedom. But the emperor didn't want money. He wanted Burgundy. The territory had once belonged to his great-grandfather, Charles the Bold. He also wanted the Valois dynasty to renounce all claims to Italy once and for all. Francis refused. He wrote these words to the emperor: "I am resolved to tolerate incarceration for as long as God wills it, rather than accept terms which are harmful to my realm."
Cursed be the French king!
Charles was livid. Nothing was more important to him than recovering the lands which had belonged to his ancestors. Francis asked to meet the emperor face to face, but Charles V refused his prisoner's request. With King Francis behind bars, the kingdom was now more vulnerable than ever. Enemies, both near and far, began to circle.